The clairvoyance of being press is limited, and so we rely on press releases. There's quite a few things to talk about, with two of the big stories happening basically yesterday. But before we talk about that, there's a few things to have as catch-up. The first is on catch-up for a game that we reviewed about 2 weeks ago. This is imprint-x. They have released a big patch that adds more stuff, as well as some sort of tweaks and improvements and bug changes and things like that. And we have a release talking about the Atari Flashback Classics Volume 1 and 2 now being released for PS4 and Xbox One. That may not seem like much, but this is a story that we're going to come back to kind of tangentially in for one of the big stories. There's two stories that are not via press releases, but via current goings-on and kind of stories led by YouTubers. The first story is a story that has been essentially revocalized by John Bain, aka Total Biscuit, and it is about G2A. People who don't know who G2A is, it is a online game trading company. There's been a lot of controversy around it. My personal feelings around it, and I think the Torch's personal feelings around it, is I haven't really had that much of a connection with G2A. I've always seen G2A as rather dubious. With some of there's always been some sort of talk around it. So it's a company that we've never really engaged with, pretty much on any level. And the main crux of this part of the story is that Total Biscuit has been in communication with Gearbox, handing over documentation and other various bits of information about G2A and the illegal trading of Gearbox games. As I said before, this is kind of a revocalization because companies like Tiny Build have had it's gone around. This is a story that has gone around before, but this is the first time that Gearbox has sort of come forward and released a statement through it. And Total Biscuit is kind of at the heart of this, but it's much more of a consultancy communication role, the handing over of information that he has garnered. It is a very interesting video, and I would say go and watch it, because this issue becomes quite complex, because it's quite about the issue of how games are traded, the legitimacy of digital, the selling and trading of digital games and things. It is a very interesting watch, and this is a story that has been going on for quite some time, and there are people out there like Total Biscuit who are far more knowledgeable on this than I. Go and watch this video, because it is a story that is almost continuous. The next story that I want to talk about is about Alos and Persona 5. That being that Alos has released a statement trying to restrict what can be put out forward as Let's Plays or what streamers can do about Persona 5, putting very strict guidelines of going, we don't want you to do spoilers for this bit. This isn't the first time that a company has done this. Companies like Naughty Dog have said before, try to avoid spoilers because we want people to buy the game and we don't want people to know the story, something that is completely story driven, but they didn't put any restrictions onto people. They just said, and that is exactly what Alos has done. Alos has put forward a statement saying, if you stream past this in-game day or this point within the story, you run the risk of being content ID'd or getting a community or just a strike through Twitch or through YouTube. This is something that goes into an area that is actually relatively complex, because it starts moving into fair use rules, copyright laws and things like that, and what YouTubers and streamers, what they can and can't actually do. And so it gets into an area that's very complex, and this is the point where I point towards Leonard French. Leonard French is a YouTuber and also a copyright lawyer attorney, an actual lawyer. And he has talked multiple times about these sort of YouTube lawsuits, mainly about the H3H3 lawsuit and the Jim Sterling lawsuit over the last couple of months. And he goes through and explains in detail, going through actual copyright law, saying what restrictions they are allowed to place on, as what other companies have said or vocalized before, and what restrictions they can't do. It is a very interesting watch, and it gets very complex. Some parts of it I find quite hard to explain, because I'm not a lawyer, and there's a lot of lawyery terms and a lot of lawyery language and sort of insinuations that are made through this. So I would say go and watch Leonard French's video on this, because it is something that's very interesting, but it's also something that YouTubers and streamers, basically online video makers for video games, have to know about this sort of thing. And from here, we're going to talk about some of the press releases that were released through Games Press. The first one I want to talk about is the BAFTA Game Awards. The BAFTA Game Awards were last night. I missed the first bit of it. The pre-show went on for nearly 2.5 hours, or 2 hours or something like that, and I went off and did something else and missed the first bit of the award show. But I did see and watch it. It was actually very funny. Danny Wallace is a very good host. Very funny, especially at the point when he had to try and... one of the VTs got fucked up, and he had to cover and ad-lib for a little bit while they try and, as he said, rewind the tape. And so here are the winners of the various awards. The Special Award went to Brenda Romero. The Artistic Achievement Award went to Inside. The Audio Achievement Award went to The Last Guardian. The Best Game Award went to Uncharted 4. Best British Game went to Overcooked. Best Debut Game went to Firewatch. Best Evolving Game went to Rocket League. Best Family Game went to Overcooked as well. Best Game Design went to Inside. The award for Game Innovation went to That Dragon Cancer. Best Mobile Game went to, unsurprisingly, Pokemon Go. Best Multiplayer Game went to, also unsurprisingly, Overwatch. Best Music went to Virginia. Best Narrative went to Inside as well. Best New Original Property went to, again, Inside. And Best Performer went to Cissy Jones for Delilah in Firewatch. There were 2 additional awards. The first one was the Ones to Watch Award, and that went to Among the Stones. And there was also the Esports Audience Award, which went to Clash Royale. I was quite surprised by that one. It's always very interesting seeing the BAFTA awards and seeing how they compare to the much more American-centric awards, because, well, it's kind of like the difference between the Oscar and the Golden Globes. At times they don't necessarily match up, and it's always very interesting to see where they don't match up rather than where they do. And now comes the story everyone is talking about, every single person probably wants me to talk about, every single person talking about. This is going to be where the bulk of this episode is going to end up lying, and that is the release of information about the XBox Scorpio. To those that don't know, the Xbox One Scorpio is a update to the Xbox One. It is a big boost in power and technology for an Xbox One. It's basically the same sort of idea as the PS4 and the PS4 Pro. It's sort of this incremental update, this big hardware update. Personally, I don't really see much point in it. It's having these incremental updates are incremental, and with gaming a lot of the time, I don't really see the point, especially within consoles, or even with PCs for that matter. Digital Foundry were the ones that had the scoop on this. Digital Foundry are a part of Eurogamer, and they have a big, long 15-minute video going through the specs, and here are the specs. Here listed off on the Eurogamer website as the Project Scorpio, then there's the version that is in the normal Xbox One, and the version that is in the PS4 Pro. And the one thing that is always very impressive is that the technology itself that is inside the Scorpio is very, very impressive. It is very, very high powered, and that is probably the most fascinating thing about this, is that there is a lot of good tech inside the Scorpio, and it certainly is something where they really are trying to push the tech boundary, especially against the PS4 Pro. They really are trying to push back and trying to regain the ground as the most powerfulest console. That's the line that the PS4 Pro currently holds, sort of emblazoned on all the boxes. But the one big difference between the PS4 Pro and the Scorpio in regards to that increase of tech is the fact that the PS4 Pro is already out, and the Scorpio, even if it is ahead of schedule, as some say it was reported, it's not going to come out till Christmas, probably about 6 months away. So there is about a year between the two techs, which means that just by the factor of time, the Xbox Scorpio could just have better hardware in there just by the age of the platform. If you think the big difference between the PS4 Pro and the Scorpio compared to the Xbox One and the original PS4, there's only 3 years, 4 years difference between them. And so a year in the realms of technology is actually a very, very long time. So the Scorpio was going to be the powerfuler of the two consoles comparatively on release, just by the nature of time, let alone the increase or the boost up or putting more expensive tech inside of it. It was going to be more powerfuler just by the nature of time. But as The Verge pointed out in an article, there are still many unanswered questions. The release that happened was purely just the tech. It was just the tech release of saying what's the actual hardware that's going to be inside the console. That's it. Nothing else is known. And so there are still some questions to be answered. And here are some of the questions that this article in Verge asks, which I think are questions that still need to be answered most paramountly. The first and probably the most obvious question to be answered is price. The speculation that's going around now in regards to the price of the machine is that it's going to be around $500, which would be where I would probably estimate it. It'd probably be somewhere between £500 and £600, considering the tech that's inside of it, as well as considering the price point of things like PS4 Pro. The next question is the physical size of the machine. We don't really know how big it is. Considering the size of the current running of the consoles, it's probably going to be fairly bulky. The phrase that everyone kept on going around when the PS3, the 360 came out was about the size of a VCR, and that's probably as best the estimation that I could probably come up with. It's probably going to be around the size of a VCR. But then even these days, well, I think that most of the people who are going to be interested in buying a VCR don't even know what a VCR even is these days. That just makes me feel old. And another question to be asked is the Microsoft plan for VR, especially for the Xbox. Because the one thing that this update of consoles, both the PS4 and the XBox Scorpio, actually want to do is to be VR ready. There is basically, to me, there is only two reasons why there's been this update to consoles, and that is 4K and VR. And the most interesting thing regarding VR on these consoles is that Microsoft used to have this partnership with Oculus. They made a big deal of when the Oculus comes out, it's going to come with the Xbox controller. But that partnership has been slowly receding, with Microsoft saying several months ago that they are just going to start making their own VR headset. They've already been in the process of making the Microsoft HoloLens for quite some time as an AR device, so making their own VR device themselves is just the transference of technology, mostly. Most likely the Scorpio is going to be VR ready, but the devices that are going to be for it are at the moment relatively unknown. You would think things like the Oculus or the HTC Vive would be ones that would be compatible, considering they are compatible for PC as well. But then comes the consideration of how PlayStation has done it through their PlayStation VR headset, and the exclusivity and the cut-off nature of VR for the consoles, because consoles are a closed platform, and so it would be in the inclination for a console manufacturer to have a single console-specific VR headset. So, at the moment, while the Scorpio is going to seem like it is VR ready, and by the technology is most likely going to be VR ready, it is relatively unknown what devices are going to be compatible with it. With my personal speculation, purely speculation, they're going to do something like PlayStation, just have the Microsoft VR headset, the same way they have the Microsoft HoloLens. It is just going to be a device manufactured and produced by themselves, the same way they do all the other devices. And this question of will the Scorpio have unique graphical effects or emphasize 4K and a frame rate, this is something that I've always wanted to talk about, mainly because this is something, the push for 4K and like 60 frames or 120 frames, it's always been something that I see as secondary. I don't care about graphics. Even from a critical perspective, I don't care. The phrase that I've often said in conversation is that a shit game with shiny graphics just makes a shiny turd. It doesn't matter. Graphics doesn't matter. It is secondary. But I do think that this new generation of consoles, just as the PS4 Pro did, they are going to push the fact that it can do 4K and 60 frames a second. It's going to be something that they're going to push, and push hard. But the thing that many people have said, I have said, and probably many more people will say, is that the problem that Microsoft has at the moment isn't with technology. As I said before, the Scorpio is, and probably was always, going to be the most powerful console on its release. But the problem with the Xbox One at the moment is its catalogue. It has some good games, but not enough. This is something that can kind of be said about the PlayStation as well, but to a lesser extent. The Xbox 360 became the big behemoth that it did because of its catalogue. It had this huge catalogue of multiplayer games, and very good multiplayer games for it. The Xbox One is less so. The Call of Duty was much more popular than it was before, and even so, its exclusivity has passed over to PlayStation. Bungie made the big behemoths of the final rounds for the Halo franchise, and they have moved on and made Destiny, and Destiny is now all cross-platform, including PCs. This is very much highlighted in an article that was done on Forbes, saying that the XBox Scorpio needs a killer app, and it should be a Destiny rival. The most sadly ironic thing out of it is that the company that is making Destiny, Bungie, were the ones making the Halo franchise, Halo 1 through 3, which was one of the most popular games that Microsoft has ever produced. It is quite sad and quite ironic now that Microsoft needs to fight against a company that used to be solely exclusive to them for over nearly 2 decades. So the big push for technology could end up being to the detriment of Microsoft themselves. And as a final word on all of this, there is a tweet by Dan Marshall which I think sums up the entire technological argument that Microsoft is trying to push very well, and that is, while the Scorpio will have this extremely powerful processors and all of these various things inside of it, Nintendo, with 2 Wii U's duct taped together, managed to make one of the best games ever made by current standards. So it would be very interesting to actually hear what you think on this as well, so feel free to talk about it in comments. And with that, I'll say, if you found this episode informative, please consider subscribing and sharing the video around, and I will see you next Tuesday for the next Press Rush.